Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Mirror Dungeon 3 hard solo video. This time we will be using Meursault, who I would say is a pretty average identity. Before we begin, I'd like to preface this by saying this run was an absolute nightmare. Pretty much every single boss was handcrafted to put Meursault in the grave. Anyways, let's start by breaking down his kit, and exactly why he's not very good at soloing. His skill 1, Rip, is a 5-11 single coin envy skill. On use it gives 2 slash protection and 3 charge, and if it hits it gives another 3 charge. This is meant to be his main way of gaining charge, but because of how we're forced to play him, as his passive serves that role much better. Speaking of, his passive, Enduring Spirit, requires 3 envy and gives up to 6 charge for taking a hit, and an additional 6 charge for losing clashes. The clash losing part is something you never want to do, but the other half is mostly unavoidable during the first few turns, so you're almost always gaining charge. His skill 2, Energy Cycle, is a 3-coin Gloom skill, rolling 5-11, but can go up to 14 when at 5 charge. The first 2 coins inflict 2 Rupture on a head's hit, and the third inflicts 3 Rupture and spends 3 charge to inflict 2 Slash Fragility. This is a decent setup skill to deal more damage, as the Slash Fragility is more consistent and cheaper than the defense down on the skill 3. Though that's all it's really good for, as its clash potential is pretty lackluster. Skill 3, Energy Current, is a 4-coin Pride skill, rolling 5-13. But can go up to 17 when at 5 charge. For every coin hit, you spend 2 charge to inflict 2 defense level down. I believe 3 defense level down is equivalent to 1 fragile, though feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. So essentially you are spending 8 charge for 2.5 fragile. That's decent when he's in an actual team, but for soloing it's incredibly inefficient compared to the skill 2. His defense skill is a simple guard that gives 2 charge on combat start. The only thing really to note is that it's not an evade skill, so no evade abusing for me this run. Now the most keen observers among you may have already noticed the problem. His rolls are not very good, even when he has charge. This makes soloing a lot more difficult, especially on the later floors where clashing becomes almost impossible, and with no way to avoid damage because defense skills suck at being defensive, the only choice left is to rely on egos. Specifically, one in particular, Capote. Now before we talk about that ego, we should talk about why exactly it's necessary. And there's no better example than the first floor boss, and the first major roadblock of the run, Marile. The biggest issue in any solo run, or hell, even regular runs for that matter, is being forced to tank attacks you're weak to. The only way to play around these is by stopping them from attacking in the first place. In normal runs, this is easily done by simply redirecting the clash. In solo runs, however, your only option is to use an ego, but not to win the clash. Instead, the goal is to do a significant amount of damage to multiple enemies and hopefully stagger them before they can actually attack. This is why Capote is necessary, as when it's uptide 4 it gains AoE on the corrosion. Having gotten Blue Zippo Lighter and Fiery Down as our starting gifts, we had to stall each fight before until we had enough resources to fuel it well. Then we simply reset until it targets multiple of the red sheets, as they are the ones doing the most damage. This staggers them as they're weak to blunt, but we aren't done yet, as we have to use it again, otherwise they'll still do too much damage. And we do it a third time, making sure to play as defensively as possible.
효과적이네요. 이 방식을 기억하는 게 좋겠어요.
We get staggered, but now we've reduced the enemy's numbers enough and have enough skill slots that we no longer have to play defensively. and with a little stalling to ensure we heal as much as possible, the first boss is beaten.
방해물을 제거합니다. 정지. 벗어날 수 없다. 방해물을 제거합니다. 모을 필요는 없겠군요.
Our reward is Homeward, giving us some much needed healing. At the first shop, we buy ourselves a heal and pick up the Golden Urn, Bloody Gadget, and Night Vision Goggles. The Floor 2 boss is against Ebony Queen's Apple, and I've honestly got nothing to say here. All Floor 2 bosses I find to be easy, and there's never anything interesting about them, so I'll just skip to the end, where we get both the best and the worst ego gift of the run.
모을 필요는
구입하게. 돛대를 부러뜨리는 것만큼 중요.
The Rusty Commemorative Coin. It gives us a second free use of our egos, which we are heavily relying on this run. Pretty much every normal fight is exactly like the first floor boss, except most of them have more favorable damage types. Entering the third boss we are up against So That No One Will Cry. Just like the first boss, he does exclusively blunt plus lust damage, which means we are 4 times weak to it unless we use Regret. Even if we do that though, and make it only 2 times, our fate still lies in the hands of RNG.
기억하는 게 좋겠어요.
구속구가 나의
The only way we can survive the first turn is if with all of his attacks, he lands a maximum of 1 heads. Any more than that and we are stagger and die.
방해물을
Turn 2, we have to force a corrosion, as there is no way to avoid staggering this turn.
제자 들이받아주지.
승객이 딱콩 한 방 먹였어.
제자 들이받아주지.
놀라운 명령이네요. 적을 완벽히 파악하고 있으신 거군요.
적합한 관리법이었어요. 다행이에요. 여러분들
Turn 3, we manage to stagger the body with our corrosion and lower his health to only 53, though he's still doing fatal damage to us, and thanks to Regret stacking Bind, we are slower than him, meaning we have to win this final clash or else he will kill us. We don't have to actually worry about it though, as our egos roll higher naturally.
이 구속구가 나의 폭력을 저지하기엔 턱없이 모자르지.
Our rewards are pretty useless, except for First Aid Kit, but the extra power tied to it deters me, and I choose 4-leaf clover instead, and get wrist guards as well. At the shop we pick up Curriculum Vitae, Disc Fragment, and Coffee and Cranes. This helps so I don't have to stall 30 plus turns every fight to gain ego resources. The 4th floor boss is the Drifting Fox. This boss will get out of control very quickly if you let it stack up enough rupture. The umbrellas are really the biggest issue in that regard, as they easily apply rupture count, and once they do, it's basically impossible to get rid of it without dying. The only thing we can do to survive is to make sure we clash with the fox's gluttony skill, as it's the one actually inflicting rupture.
적절하지 않았을까요? 늦으면
방해물을
Turn 2,
제거합니다.
we have to use Chain of Others to gain a permanent 3 protection, as otherwise survivability becomes too difficult.
수많은 것들이 옥죄어 온다.
Using Capote, we ensure that the next turn we will corrode, negating the stagger that inevitably happens.
것들이 옥죄어 온다.
무얼 잘못했는지 아는 것부터가 시작이랬어.
책자 들이받아주지.
아, 이런. 아무튼 놀라운 한방이네요. 이런 동료들 상태에 신경도.
Even if we didn't corrode this turn, it would generally be fine as there's no real damage coming for us.
책자 들이받아주지. 책자 들이받아주지.
방금 어떻게 하신 거죠?
책자
깜짝 놀랐어요.
들이받아주지.
대성공이야. 내 끼가 배고파했어. 잘 됐다.
But it does bring us to neutral sanity, allowing us to clash with our regular skills, though it's still not guaranteed. Using Regret also serves us two purposes.
구속구가 나의
Firstly, we are able to remove the negative debuffs, meaning the rupture stack that we have been accumulating, and secondly, we lower our sanity enough so that when the skill check pops up that's impossible to win, we can corrode next turn.
관리법에 적어둬야.
규정에 없던 내용이군요.
적들이 흔들흔들.
Afterwards, it's easy to win the clashes with all of our ego passives online. Shout out to the gift Lithograph. Having so many minion enemies with low stagger bars makes regenning health super easy, and without it, I surely would have died here. But anyways, the rest of this fight is pretty straightforward, so I'll just let it play out normally.
칼날이 잘 드네요. 아마 그 공격이 약점이었겠죠? 적들이 흔들.
방해물을 제거합니다. 그다지 유쾌하진 않군요. 그다지 유쾌하진 않군요.
적들이 흔들흔들.
방해물을 제거합니다. 모을 필요는 없겠군요. 그다지 유쾌하진 않군요.
효과적이네요. 이 방식을 기억하는 게 좋겠어요. 사냥이 성공적이었네요.
방해물을 제거합니다.
부위 파괴. 돛대를 부러뜨리는 것만큼 중요한 한방이었어요.
모을 필요는 없겠군요.
Our options this time are pretty bad. Enemy coin power or 50% increase and decrease damage are absolutely out of the question as their benefits are far too great to even think about. So we take the only choice left, 4-leaf clover, and get prejudice as a bonus. At the shop, we take Thunder Branch, and that's about it. Floor 5 was almost identical to the others. Spam Capote and stall 20 turns to regain the lost resources. Eventually, we make it to the final shop where we pick up Grey Coat and Illusory Hunt. Entering into the final boss, we are up against perhaps the single worst boss we could have gotten, the Skin Prophet. You may think, oh, this guy's not that bad, he's just a simple gimmick fight, just play into his gimmick and you'll be fine. But then you realize he does blunt plus lust damage, something that we are quadruple weak to, and the only way to reduce it is by using Regret, which thanks to the rusty commemorative coin, we have to use twice and obliterate our sanity. At first glance, this doesn't appear to be too bad, as we are able to clash with most of his skills, but that's only the case for the first turn of his aggressive phase. W. Meursault only has good clash power when he has charge, so using our skills to clash with the first turn means we no longer have the charge required to do the same the next turn. This means that we will get staggered and die. This fight took me, no joke, 3 hours to figure out. I tried so many different strategies from regular clashing to ego spamming and forcing corrosion. I even had to, God forbid, learn how the Skin Prophet's mechanics actually worked. But they all ended the same, in failure. A combination of unavoidable blunt damage, Capote inflicting self-burn, and rusty commemorative coin destroying my sanity, both figuratively and literally, made this fight feel impossible. To truly understand how I managed to ultimately beat him, we must first have a complete and total understanding of how this boss works. He can be broken down into 2 distinct phases, both of which encapsulates a total of 5 turns. The first 3 turns, he is in his passive phase. He has 3 unclashable attacks and 2 counters, as well as increased resistances to every damage type. In this phase, he's basically untouchable, and you'd never really want to anyways. This phase can also be ended early by doing enough damage to each candles to light them. The second phase is his aggressive phase, which lasts 2 turns. Every candle is now lit and uses a counter, and the Skin Prophet uses 5 blunt attacks. If you do enough damage to the candles in this phase, they will be snuffed out. The second turn is exactly like the first, but Skin Prophet also uses his skill 9-2. However, if you are able to snuff out all of the candles the turn before, he will use 6-5 instead, which if it connects, will auto-stagger himself. So, with this information, how did I manage to do it? Well, first and foremost, I had to up-tie all of Meursault's egos to tier 4. Capote was already tier 4 as it was required for the rest of the run, but for Regret, I needed the extra AoE on Corrosion, and I needed the guaranteed protection on Chains of Others. The first 2 turns of the fight are redundant. You can't do anything on those 2 turns as there's no way to light all the candles, nor would you want to. Turn 3 is where the plan gets put into motion. The main reason I kept failing before was because I was always too late and constantly trying to recover as a result. So I thought, what if I do everything a turn earlier? Instead of trying to use my ego to clash with his skills, I instead used them to try and snuff out the candles. The order in which the ego is used turn 3 is very important too. I use Chains of Others first, so that not only do I debuff the Skin Prophet, but Rusty Commemorative Coin duplicates it and gives me 4 protection next turn. Next is Capote, just to reduce sanity. And finally, Regret, as since I'll be debuffed by Chains of Others, it will be AoE, and it's the only way to make me neutral to lust damage. With that, turn 4 I Corrode, and this turn is entirely pure luck. I have 3 uses of Regret, and I have to hope that they are able to hit every candle. With the 7 protection, I can ignore the Skin Prophet entirely, and pray that the candles get snuffed. If they don't, it's a reset, but if they do, then we can move on to turn 5.
승객이 딱콩 한 번 먹였어.
결선 부위에 따른
Here, thanks to corroding, we now have neutral sanity, and with all of our ego passives online, our clash potential is really high, allowing us to clash with all of his skills. And because we were able to snuff out the candles, 6-5 is in play, and auto-staggers the skin prophet.
늦으면 메피랑 먼저 갈
Also,
거야.
it's good to mention that if not for Greycoat, I would not be able to counteract the burn, and would have had to use Regret again for the cleanse. After that, the fight is basically won. All that's left to do is dump as much damage as possible into him, and make sure the burn doesn't accidentally kill me first.
드네요. 아마 그 공격이 약점이었겠죠?
규정에 없던
하루
내용이군요.
기다리는 거 못해.
방해물을 제거한다.
아, 그 공격은 적합하진 않아 보이네요. 관리법에 적어둬야.
지금 뭘 잘못했는지는 알기나 해. 드라마에서 봤어.
이렇게 하신 이유가 있으셨겠지만 당장에 납득이 가지는 않네요. 이대로 가면 난파예요.
방해물을 제거한다. 모을
부위
필요는
파괴. 돛대를 부러뜨리는 것만큼 중요한 한 방이었어요.
다들
And that's
알맞은
how,
편으로
despite
조각났다.
all odds, I managed to beat Mirror Dungeon 3 hard mode exclusively with W Meursault. This is without a doubt the hardest solo I've done so far, and it's entirely because most of the bosses kept using blunt damage. My final thoughts on the run are: Capote is the GOAT, Rusty Commemorative Coin has bipolar disorder, and I have a newfound hatred of religion. If you liked the video, give it a like and maybe consider subscribing. Otherwise, I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.